so we are recording. Do you think I don't need to ask who you are again? We could use that footage.
Yeah,
right?
we can use that.
Okay. So the first couple of questions are just sort of like ones that we are asking everybody to get like the filler and the information. So, I guess, what is your field of study and how did you get into it?
Okay, so I suppose in fancy terms, my field of study is social-ecological resilience and the application of Indigenous knowledges and life ways to social-ecological resilience or human ecological well-being. I've always been fascinated by culture, and so I'm really interested in the relationship between human culture and the rest of the natural world. Yeah. And how I got into it was, it was a bit of a long trajectory, and I'll try and cut a long story short. I was actually trained in, very much in the Western paradigm, and as I think I said earlier, I was a social worker, so my work was very much about human relationships, and Western paradigms of social work or models are very much human to human. And then of course as I grew up completely apart from my Ngātarangi roots in Auckland, and but gradually I began to reconnect, and then but also happening with that was I went to Saskatchewan to work, and I directed a health promotion research centre, and the more I got out and went around Saskatchewan, and I went and visited all the communities and went up north to the Indigenous communities, and I would say, what does well-being mean to you? What do you think we should be doing? And and they would always say, the elders and the people from the communities at La Loche, La Ronge, even around Saskatoon, they'd say it's about the land, and if the land is sick, the people are sick. And so that, and then just my own experience of being a migrant in another land, but really coming into a much deeper relationship with that land through the physicality, the culture, but also my dreams, what I sensed, what I intuited. It took me into a deeper way of relating and being with place. And then it's just been sort of following your nose. You know how you do. I've got to keep going with this thread.
Perfect answer. So the next two questions, sometimes people answer them together. So I guess it's like three questions, but like it's like, why do you personally care about climate change? And then I guess if you don't answer the other part, then I'll ask it again.
Okay. Well, I actually, it sounds strange, but I always resisted caring about climate change for some time, and the reason being, it's not that I didn't care, but I've always seen climate change as being symptomatic of our deep disconnect, from the earth and from each other, and so I always like to go to the root of an issue, but. Now, of course, you see what's happening to Papatūānuku, Mother Earth. You see what's happening. You see just like what we're facing, but the generations to come are facing, and I deeply care about that. And when you are connected to the earth, you see those changes, and I also see climate crisis as an opportunity. It's a doorway to address our disconnect, our human disconnect, which manifests in so many ways.
So I feel like the next two questions that you will answer them in, they're like, what is your unique way of addressing it, and what are you doing about climate change? But I'm going to ask them at the end, because I think this question, why is connection to place important to addressing climate change?
Okay, why is connection to place important to addressing climate change? What we have at the moment is a proliferation of techno-rational, what I call techno-rational approaches to addressing climate change. And I'm not saying they're not important, like clean energy, renewable energy, all of this is important. However, I think those approaches have also become corporatized. And fundamentally, the way of addressing climate crisis, it's about our connection to place. And climate crisis has only come about through our lack of connection to place. And the more that not only people who are still indigenous to place, but the more that those who are intergenerationally disconnected, or what I call the long ago colonized, can come into this deeper relationship to place. We're also going to address a lot of other things, not only climate crisis, but we're going to be able to address things like addiction, consumerism. Because this, once you come into that deeper relationship with place, it not only meets practical needs, but that reciprocity, it's a very spiritual, emotional relationship as well. So it's a really holistic, grounded way of that is almost a protective factor against climate crisis. So that's some of the reasons why I think that connection to place is so fundamental, and getting to know the legal laws of the land, and getting to and to support those, because if we don't have place, we have nothing, and so place is where it all starts.
Here, and I'm thinking about my mulberry tree.
Yeah.
The city cut it down, but anyways, without telling. That was an amazing answer. I just want to make sure that there's no other questions on here that have quite the same. Okay, so this one, and you might want to challenge the word anthropogenic. But how does anthropogenic climate change, am I saying that word right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Represent colonialism to Indigenous peoples? It's a loaded one.
Right. Well, okay. So I've just got to think for a minute.
I guess, how is climate change
represent colonialism?
Related to colonialism?
Yeah. Okay. Well, climate change is intimately related to colonialism and of course to capitalism and neoliberalism. So, there's been an argument that the Earth has been warming and it's gone through different periods of warming, but since industrialisation, we've seen, which is really when the Western capitalist machine started to really gain traction and get underway, and where colonisation started to intensify, we've seen those carbon emissions going up, and of course the latest form of colonialism is really about the proliferation of these Western systems and these ways of thinking, not just in the West but in all parts of the world. And so you've got this massive corporatization and of commodification and consumerism, and so the globalization of the economy has really intensified climate change, and that's really the new colonialism. And so colonialism is no longer limited to just Western peoples and institutions. It is permeating globally through these corporate entities. So it's intimately connected to the colonization of lands and of bodies, and so it's almost become like lands and bodies have become disposable.
So good. I'm like, Lewis, you're so good. Okay, so so in your book you talk about intergenerational resilience. So I don't know if you want to preface that it's part of your book or not, but
yeah. I want to read a quote, but Carol, what's
okay.
Your question?
So because I'm skipping one, because I want you to answer these two maybe first and then go into the other one. What is intergenerational resilience and why is it important, and therefore why is it important in climate change discussions?
Okay, when I think about intergenerational resilience, I come back to this word called whakapapa. So that's a Māori word in the Māori language, and it simply means to place in layers or to stack. But it's about really knowing the interconnectedness of our genealogy, right? Of our kinship relations. So if I'm going to think in kind of like, how would I define it in like technical terms, I'd say, well, okay, intergenerational resilience or indigenous intergenerational resilience is the connectivity and the knowledge transmission between, not only between human generations, but between human and more than human life or species. So it's that deep listening and connectivity. And it's really important, and it all comes back to a relationship to place, that that connectivity and that ability to learn from our other than human relatives as well as our human relatives and the older generations, the younger generations, right, is really key to how we address climate change. Now, if you don't mind, I want to read you a passage. It's from New Zealand, and it's by Pākehā, Western environmental activist. But she talks about the unravelling of this whakapapa within the Western generations, and how this is anti-ethical to addressing climate change. So here I go. So Catherine Delahunty, so she's a well-known New Zealand environmental activist. So she says, the environment conservation movement has been moving far too slowly away from monoculturalism and racism. We have a sense of urgency and panic around the collapse of nature, which can lead to a dismissal of Indigenous rights issues. The white murmurings about kaitiakatanga guardianship don't indicate the depth and complexity of a concept which is outside our experience. If we dig deeper, we have to acknowledge that Pākehā culture is not whakapapa based. Our dislocation from our original villages, stories and traditions of caring for our resources means we find it hard to credit the power of a culture which, despite the best efforts of colonialism, is still shaped by whakapapa and relationships with a specific place. So, and you see this in the, you see this in New Zealand, I'm sure we'd see it in Turtle Island, that, you know, that often the white environmental movement, with the best of intentions, will often come at, lowering carbon emissions. Yeah, sure, we need to lower carbon emissions. We need renewable energy. But that's from a very different place than actually coming from a place which is whakapapa based, which is kinship based, and which has that kinship with the land. Because you're not just coming at climate crisis in terms of, we need this technology to come in here, and it's very mixed up with the corporate entities. You're coming at it from, who is this place, and what does our place need, and the kin that are part of this place, and how's that connected to our language and our culture, and who we want to be in the world. So it's just really different. And when you know those creation stories and you know how they connect, and you know your responsibilities to the other kin, and you see you're of the otter clan. So you have unique responsibilities. So it's just a really different way. So to me, all of that is Indigenous intergenerational resilience.
I'm crying. It's so beautiful. Yeah. Ramon, it's so beautiful. If he's even gonna be the one editing.
Well, but it was one thing I also want to say.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So also, in terms of kind of a vision of sort of what that could look like, is there's all cultures have been whakapapa based. All cultures have had those genealogical connections. What we've seen under the westernisation of society, and gradually more and more its commodification and neoliberalist orientation, is that we've seen that the erosion of those intergenerational relationships and the erosion of eldership within not only, with Indigenous communities, we still have this, but within communities that have lost that Indigenous connection to place, there's been that erosion of eldership, and I think we need to be really re-sewing that back into communities. And so, so my vision is to grow that eldership, through the main Indigenous connections, to grow the eldership in other communities, which have had that. So that's a really important part of intergenerational resilience.
It's a really important part of our course. One of the assignments is to talk to someone that's like a different generation than you. We didn't make it older because what if an older person took it, but like talk to someone who's a different generation than you and like sort of talk about like the changes that they've seen in their life to try to drive that home. So that was like perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I would do with my mum, and I go, oh, we're recording. All right.
That's okay.
That's all right.
you could share. So on that note then, how is Indigenous resurgence resilient to climate change, but also essential to our, or is it and essential to our sustainability as nations?
Sustainability is what?
As nations.
As a nations. Okay, so I see Indigenous resurgence and resilience. I see it, this may sound dramatic, but I see it as almost like the last stand against capitalism, against neoliberalism, against commodification that we've seen. And so we have to support our Indigenous communities, those who are still connected to place and who are still connected to ceremony and these kinship relations. We have to support the resurgence of those ways because it's like the tree roots, and those communities are not only for them, but Indigenous resurgence is good for everybody, because that is where, if you think of a tree, is where the goodness is coming up and can spread out to people who have lost their connection to place. And so that is why, in purely practical terms, not only because it's ethical, not only because of the original agreements that were formed when people from the West came to Turtle Island, but because not only is it the ethical thing to do, it's the practical thing to do in terms of our future, in terms of survival, because the Indigenous communities, those who are still Indigenous to place, that have that connection to place, that have those kinship relations. And that's our place of deepest resistance to climate crisis.
Okay, and then this is a very similar question, but it might produce a bit of a different answer. How can we address ecological issues through the revitalization of Indigenous wisdoms, knowledges, languages across all cultures?
Okay, so there's two starting points. I see there's two starting points for this. So one has to do with resurgence of the communities, say Indigenous communities who are in this place. But the other thing, and if you think about how language shapes thinking, how Indigenous languages, they reshape our thinking in terms of our connections with each other and with our place. They're very different from the Cartesian orientated English language, which is self-other, right? So that is, but also it's important that people in this work of Indigenous resurgence and the resurgence of Indigenous wisdoms within all cultures are in their own skins. Yep. And so I always encourage people, what is your Indigenous cultural lineage? Because your people were Indigenous to place once. What do you know about your ancestors? What do you know about the Indigenous life ways and the ways that they lived? And so when I think about the resurgence of Indigenous wisdoms in all cultures, it's like, yes, okay, so here we are in Deshkanzibi territory, right? So this is the papa, this is the foundation in terms of the wisdoms that primarily inform this, yeah. But for me to connect to this, right? So then I draw on, oh, okay, what do I know from Mataranga Māori? What do I know from my Ngātarangi lineage that can help situate me in the way that's culturally and authentic within my being? Because I can't just come and put another culture on top of myself, can I? And then how does my Scottish lineage, how does that help me? What do I know about that, right? What can I draw on because to know that this is a capacity that I do have in my being, right? So not to become indigenous to here, but to be able to engage respectfully in a way that's not just from here, but it is of here. Yeah.
That has to go in.
Yeah.
Like, because people struggle with that, right? Like,
yeah.
And what we're seeing, like, I know we're recording, but just what we're seeing with the people in Ottawa right now claiming indigeneity and using it for political gain.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to write a piece for the conversation at the moment about this.
Yeah.
And so about what's the essence of my message, but also I'm trying to deal with what we've had, the pretensionism, so just to try and write this in, it's bloody hard.
Oh yeah. It's really
so
hard.
complicated.
It's intense.
Yeah.
Daryl LaRue, who's like he does a lot of like Métis scholarship and lineage stuff, and he talks about like he calls pretendianism like the ultimate white supremacy because it's like literally erasing and appropriating and replacing. It seeks to replace Indigenous.
Yeah. Like that was That's it, in what I'm dealing with. I'm talking about white supremacy. Right. Anyway, I'm trying. That's going to help me.
Yeah,
okay.
I can send you the tweet that I.
Oh, that'd be great. Can you send me the tweet? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like you kind of told us a little bit about like your unique way of addressing climate change because it is very much your like work. But I guess for the final questions, if like envision your climate future, what do you see?
The good scenario. I'm going to see a good scenario, and for me, the good scenario is actually about being your best self. I'm going to cry because you can't necessarily control the circumstances. You can, but you can always do your best. And so my climate future is where I see that I see a much simpler way of life. I see us educating differently. I see us teaching and learning differently. I see us teaching and learning from much more from a place of spirit and heart, and bringing that together with mind and with hand, and living much more communally, and living, I think we're going to be living a lot more with, I hope, with people who are people who are different than ourselves. So the future I'm envisioning is one where the walls are coming down, between different people, but between species as well. Yeah. So I would say, heart, head, and hand, and the walls are down.
And then, if you could have students remember one key message from you about climate change, what would that be?
Well, my queer Auntie Maria would always say it's all about relationships. So my message to you would be it's all about relationships, and when to extend that to climate change, I think that's really obvious. It's all about our relationships with our human and more than other kin, and it's about our responsibilities and it's not necessarily about the big wow pow kind of things. It's about those everyday practices. Yeah, kia ora.
And is there anything else that you would like to say? Something we should ask you, but
Yeah, I can't. No.
No.
I don't know.
That was very
Yeah,
good.
that was amazing.
Yeah.
Chimi
Mm.
Quetch. I'm like, do I stop recording or? Because always someone says something perfect right when you stop recording.
That's right.
So I'm like
No,
scared
you
too.
know, I think that's good because I think other people will say things
Yeah.
and
Okay.
it will all
That was
just all
really
fill
good.
in.